segment B, Creating Your Future. We're moving again towards the breakout session that we're going to be doing later on this afternoon. To set the stage for that, Erik Karlsen has joined us. Erik didn't give me a bio, and I was just going to say he's retired, sits around, doesn't do a whole lot, but he actually wears a lot of different hats, and I'm sure most of you know him. So please welcome Erik, and he'll do his own bio.
Since I retired about 3 years ago from the provincial government, I had a number of very interesting roles for me, and part of which is bringing me here. One of them, I want you to look at this picture and think about it while I'm talking to you. One of the roles is joined with the folks that have been presenting here today on the Water Sustainability Committee work, so that's one. Another is Smart Growth on the Ground, which is labeled on my name tag. I chair an advisory committee on that. I've been teaching at Railroads. And April 1st, a few weeks back, I was appointed to be chair of the Agricultural Land Commission. So it's a bit of a myth about retirement. My wife just basically said, "Erik, you're not retired." And I said, "Yeah, I guess you're right." But I still have time to not have to go to an office every day. Does anybody know what this picture symbolizes? What's the story here? Volunteers? Go ahead.
The emperor with no clothes, he hired some guys,
Yeah.
some con artists.
Some con artists.
Make him some clothes.
Make them some clothes. And he believed them. And he went walking down the street one day with his brand new clothes. And all of his citizens said no clothes. But they didn't say it loud enough for him to hear. And then finally a young boy was tugging on his dad's pants and said, "He's got no clothes." And the father said, "What?" And then the boy just yelled out, "He's got no clothes." Now what's the symbolism of this? Anybody get the symbolism about today's work? You're not. You're going to talk now. What do you think about the symbolism of this? Anybody want to offer? Okay, what the symbolism is, I will interpret it for you, is that as we go about our professional advisory work, we have to be very, very careful that we self-examine. We're looking at the science, as Ron was doing this morning. We're looking at the technical planning approaches that we use. We're looking at the values that we present, and really question ourselves, are we communicating information that is clear, understandable, appropriate to the situation? Are we doing it carefully? And inadvertently, we can impress ourselves with our own information and our own perspective, and at the same time not do a full job of informing public policy and private investment. So it's just something that I keep in mind all the time, is when I'm advising and talking to people, is am I being clear? Am I bringing all of the information forward? And can I do a better job of what I'm doing? And what we've heard this morning is a tremendous, rich set of presentations about doing the job better. And so I'm going to build on that. I'm not going to talk very much about water now. I'm going to talk about more to the point about leading change. And I title this Change, Challenges and Choices, Responsibilities. And I'm going to stop walking in front of the screen now. I'll walk around it. I'm used to teaching in a situation, Railroads, where the screen's up there, and I'm obviously not paying attention to the fact that it's there now. Okay, so the word challenges and choices is we have a lot of challenges and we have choices to make around that. Responsibilities, we have in our professional roles, in our job roles, in any number of them roles, we have responsibilities. People expect us to be responsible for certain things. And at the same time, we may not have, and this comes from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, if you want to read about it. We don't have always the ability to respond in the ways that we would potentially like to. And so this set of slides that I'm going to be going through in the next 15, 20 minutes or so is going deeper into this concept of responsibility. And as you walk with me through these slides, you'll be able to reflect on how you are relating in your own jobs, your own lives. And like Eugene, his retirement life, he's busy too, and how we're performing. And many of you will find that some of the things that I'll be talking about, you're doing it right on. You didn't know you were doing it in the language that I'll be using, the jargon that I'll be using, but you will identify that you're doing it. But you will also discover some gaps, and you'll say, if I could just do that, then things would work a lot better for me. So that's sort of the gist of where I'm going with this particular presentation. First of all, everything is linked to everything else. And one of the themes that I deal with in my professional life, probably not as much in my personal life, is sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about a whole range of different kinds of communities. We're talking about on your left-hand side, ecosystems, which are basically global ecosystems. There's basins. We all live in basins. This one happens to be the Okanagan Basin, but there's a Fraser Basin and so on, Columbia Basin. The bioregions, which in some cases can be a sub-basin. It's a term we use on the West Coast in terms of the Georgia Basin, which is the Georgia Basin Puget Sound region. It's a coastal bioregion. We can't call it a basin in the strictest sense of the world, although we do use the term. The actual term for the Georgia Basin is the Georgia Depression. And when we started doing an ecological systems initiative there, we didn't think the politicians would support it if we called it the Georgia Depression. So we had to go with Georgia Basin. Watersheds, places and sites. On the other side of this diagram are international laws, conventions, global systems, national, provincial, state, local, and people in activity. And I'm associated with what's called smart growth on the ground, and that is because it doesn't matter what you say or do at this scale. If you can't make sense at the people, activity, places, and sites level, you're not making a difference. And I know that a number of you are actually working at this level and potentially may not be accessing some of the broader levels. So the concept here is that we're really involved in an integration. And so when Oliver talks about soft path, I will say to Oliver, okay, are we fully linked in terms of all of our governance systems and our biophysical systems? And that's an important point of departure. Change is caused by people in terms of population and their impact on land and resources, perspectives and values. We got a bit of a flavor of values in the discussion this morning. I won't speak to any particular set of values, but we all have our own sets of values that we bring into any discussion. And associated with our values come priorities. And so the challenge here is linking up people, land, resources, people's perspectives, and the priorities that derive from that. And that's another list for the soft path approach. The natural systems, climate, the hydrograph, terrestrial and aquatic systems, those things are all in flux all of the time. Nothing is static. You may not be able to see the changes in any given point in time, but they're static. Now, professionally, I'm a planner. I'm a city planner, a regional planner, resource planner too, at times. And one of the experiences I used to have in dealing with some local government politicians and some provincial government politicians was, let's just do it. Okay, Eric, I'll do what you want me to do as a planner, but don't come and talk to me for another 5 years. In fact, we even wrote into the Municipal Act, you update your community plan every 5 years, your regional district plan every 25, or you look at it every 5 years. You look 20 years out. But the reality is, things can change overnight in somebody will come forward with a proposal that they've been thinking about, and then boom, it's an overnight change. And so Jim Nielsen, who happens to live up here now, was the Minister of Environment a few decades back, and he said, Eric, nothing is built in stone, okay? Always think about change. And that's particularly evident for our political elected officials. So change, 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 that's the theme. Okay, if we're going to meet the challenge of constant, unanticipated, and somewhat anticipated change, what do we have to deal with here? Well, first of all, we're having to deal with problem complexity, and I'll describe different ways of looking at problems in a few minutes. Changing minds. Every one of us has our own set of stories that define how we go about anything. We get it through our education, we get it through early childhood learning from our parents, our siblings, our school chums, and they become our story. So whenever I talk to you, you are listening to me through your story. Not you. Some of you who may have been, incredibly good listeners, have trained yourself, or just have a natural talent. They're very rare, by the way, if you have those. You're not listening to what I'm saying. You're listening to your story about what I'm saying. And that's good. That's who we are. That's what we do. It's okay. The point is, your story is where you are, and if I'm coming to you with another story that says, I want you to think differently, you got a problem with me, and I will have a problem with you. We'll come back to that. Leading change is about embracing people's stories and building a new collective story so that you can move forward rather than react or stop a dialogue or discussion. So I'll talk a bit about that. Now, one of the things that after so-called retiring, about 6 months later, I was asked to teach sustainable development from theory to practice at Royal Royals University, the Masters of Environment Management program. And I was given basically 4 weeks notice, and I had some cataract surgery in the 3 weeks leading up to that. And and I'm saying, oh yeah, you want me to do this? Well, anyway, I could still see enough to read a PowerPoint slide, and I had some handy slides, so I was able to teach the course, and it went out well because I was able to talk about the practice, which I've had lots of in British Columbia and other parts of Canada. And at the end of the course, somebody said, Eric, is any of this stuff written up in any books? And I said, I don't know. I've been practicing for almost 35 years, and I hadn't read a hardcovered, let alone a soft-covered technical book in all those years. So I said, if you invite me back, I'll come back, but I'll read some books. And so what I did is I started casting about, looking for some books that dealt with problem definitions, conflict resolution, leading change, moving from unsustainable to sustainable practices. And so the next several slides, I'm going to be quoting or drawing on some books that are listed in the back of my presentation, and referring to some of the writing of people like Sengay, Sharma, and Kahane. Anybody heard of those guys? Good, I didn't hear about them before. Maybe you've heard about one of them? Yeah. These guys are MIT based. I'll talk to you about a guy from Harvard. And they've been writing about all kinds of stuff around this topic in the books. That's what I do with the money I make teaching. I buy books. I got this many now. And I've read a good number of them. And this particular description of problems seemed cogent to the kind of sustainability or change management exercises that we face, or challenges that we face. And so I'm going to give you some jargon, some new jargon, but hopefully some new insights into why some of the problems you face are easy to deal with and some of them aren't. And to acknowledge this so you don't hit your head against the wall or run away saying it's just not soluble. Once you understand these frameworks, it becomes more helpful. That's my theory, and it's also my practice. Okay, a dynamic type of problem complexity means we simply don't know the cause and effect, or they're so distant between space and time that we can't link them up. So climate change is an example where, you know, yeah, we may have some sense of the cause and effect, but the impacts are, the causal relationships are so distant in time. So sure, we're going to, over the decades ahead, probably reduce greenhouse gases, but climate change is in train and you know, hang on for the ride. And that becomes very difficult in a decision-making situation. Behavioral, these are the ones that we're all most familiar with, and that is the diversity of mental models, values, and interests. And so, and that's what I was referring to in terms of stories and counter stories, values, and so on. And we've had a bit of a chat here about that already. And generative, big words, my apologies. Possible futures are emerging, we just don't know them. And often when we have that sense of a range of different possible futures, the simplest thing to do is to do short-term responses. But in effect, that becomes counterproductive because we in effect cause more problems in those situations than we can solve. So those are the different kinds of things, and I don't have time to get into the details. As I say, the source is there. This system, by the way, was used to define, the person who wrote about this is a fellow named Convening, and he has been running around the world for a couple of decades now. He was instrumental as a facilitator in moving from the apartheid government in South Africa to the elected government in South Africa, and he applies some of the techniques that I'll be talking about. What happens when all of the challenges are highly complex, nobody has the answers, or even if some people have the answers, the other people aren't listening to them, then we have to get into what's called dialogue. And a fellow named Isaacs uses this term. Dialogue is a conversation, he's American, so that's why center spelled the way it is. A conversation with a center, not sides. What it basically means that everybody who has a link to the issue at hand has to move into a circle and just simply talk about their values before they talk about their conclusions. Think about how hard that is. You'll be facing the Highlands situation through Erik Karlsen, and this is a particularly difficult challenge because there are different points of view, different values on how the Highlands should evolve, and any community should evolve. Usually there is a difficulty around where to go in any community planning exercise, any water planning exercise associated with community planning. So the goal here, when you have those highly complex situations, is simply get into a circle and start to talk about it. Tough for those who aren't used to it. And it starts with value. And Convening, who I just mentioned, he enabled people who were shooting at each other, who were literally had to leave their guns outside the meeting room to come in and talk to each other to solve a tough problem. And he was able to make conversations occur at the center. The values were shared. And then, and only then, was a solution path ahead. So when you hit the wall of conflicting interests, you stop talking about the conflict and you start talking about sharing values and coming to a common set of values. A guy named Gardner wrote a book last year called Changing Minds. And what he talked about was these 7 levers of how to go from my story. If my story is a sustainability story or a water conservation story or a whatever, you know, let's ride buses, not drive around in cars story. And I want to influence individual decision makers, organizational decision makers, whether they're public, private, combinations of the both. Then I have a toolkit here in what Gardner has written about. We'll tell you a little bit about Gardner. He's a psychologist. He's an educational psychologist. He's probably around 50. He has 20, he's at Harvard. He has 20 honorary degrees from universities around the world. So somebody thinks he's pretty hot stuff. A lot of people think he's pretty hot stuff, so I'll tell you what he wrote. He basically said, and I'll explain each of these points, he said that you have to, if you want to change from where somebody is now, particularly if they don't agree with you, to where you want them to be in the future, even for their own even for their self-welfare, you have to go through each of these steps successively. And if you miss any one of them, you'll go back. So think about situations that you face now where you feel that, you know, you've either been very successful, and maybe these will say, yeah, I did all this, or I'm not successful, and maybe I need to do something. So first of all, there has to be a reason. You have to be able to explain to somebody what the reasons are. Secondly, you have to back it up with research. So for instance, there are certain people in the world who don't like the concept of climate change, and you can explain it to them, you can give them the research, they still don't get it, because it doesn't resonate with their world. So that's the third one, resonance. And what that means is if you're trying to talk about drought management, as one of you did this morning, and it's pouring rain outside, there's a disconnect there, there's no resonance, or you're not being able to capture that resonance. So people don't get it through some kind of personal or emotional resonance. It doesn't make sense to them. You're not going far. The next one is redescription, and it's sort of an extension of resonance. What that basically means is that they have to redescribe it in their own context. You can't do that for them. So if you say to somebody, you should get a low flush toilet, somebody says, well, you know, what is it? Number 2, flush it down, number 1, whatever, you know. I'm a water conserver, or I've got an outhouse in my backyard or something. You know, they're basically saying, it doesn't fit with my reality. So you have to help them redescribe it. So in the case of, Ted gave you a couple of examples, very, very quick ones, about water metering and monitoring and so on. And that's a redescription. That person, Ted's dad already figured it out, but that person, was it Costin, Ted? Where the woman in Costin who
Yes.
Tried it, she had to make it work in her own situation before she actually believed that it was going to work. She had to redescribe it, she had to try it out. So you gotta give people that opportunity to do that. It's all pretty common sense when you stop and think about it. Then the next one is resources and rewards. If, as a public policy or anything that you're trying to change, and you're saying to somebody, you should do this, and they say, yeah, I understand your reasons, yeah, it's well backed up, resonates with me, I've been able to redescribe it to my situation, I just don't know how, I just don't have the capacity to do it, I don't have the money, I don't have the technical know-how, et cetera, et cetera. And it may benefit someone else, but it doesn't benefit me, why should I do it? Well, Gardner's basically saying you better figure that out because that's a showstopper. And so for instance, I have a lot of my planning colleagues running around saying people should ride buses and not drive their cars. Well, the bus system isn't providing service there because the density isn't high enough, frequency of travel isn't high enough, and so we haven't done the job as planners, convincing local government officials and the development industry and so on, that we have if we're going to get people out of cars, we have to have higher density developments. And in some places, it doesn't make a lot of sense. In some small communities in the interior or wherever, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say, get out of your car. So resources and rewards, there has to be the opportunity to do it and the ability to do it. Real world events. This is another one that relates to, if it's raining out and you're trying to talk about drought management, people aren't going to get it. They're looking out the window while you're talking. So you got to be careful of that. And then ultimately, people will resist anyway. And so that'll bring me to a further slide, is that there will always be resistors. The point is you want to get some mainstream people, you want to get it mainstream.
5 minutes.
Okay, I can do that. Now, this is a long list of a lot of steps that one goes through from going from a status quo situation to mainstream application of something. First of all, the genesis, and that's a biblical term, and that's not what I'm talking about, although maybe it is. But first of all, there has to be an issue or a problem that needs attention or an opportunity that people want to pursue. So that's an idea. Then somebody has to invent the solution, try it out. Then somebody has to take that and to an innovation stage. What that basically means is it works. The invention works. It's not just sitting on somebody's desk. It actually works. Ted, you gave some examples of that. So what Ted's talking about is in the innovation stage. We're not even at the early adoption stage. The early adoption stage are where people will do something because it's good to do, and it's not really going to cost them any money if they do it. They're not going to be at financial risk. If they were at the innovation stage, you typically need money to get people through the innovation stage. The early adopters will take that risk. And then there's a couple of other variations on early adoption. Somebody's trying to do less risk adverse, will follow up, and others will fine tune it. But until you go through those stages, you don't get mainstream application. You get to early majority, late majority, and then there's laggards. And a lot of attention is paid in our society to the laggards. They tend to be the naysayers, they're the people who are against change for the sake of it. Some of them get pretty politically active, and if you actually examine what they're doing, a number of them actually don't have anything to do, or the change has no impact on them. They're never going to change, and yet they're the people who often drive political policy and financial decisions in our society. Some writers basically say, just ignore them. Focus on innovation, early adoption, and early majority. The late majority will follow. Let the laggards be as they may. Okay, and this is a water-related change, and we'll try to get this up on the website, but we got to get a woman named Rebecca Brown satisfied that we can post her work on the website. This is very quickly the 5 stages that she has identified in the Sydney, Australia, about water institutional change. And basically what we're talking about here is that initially you have a project in the door, and a conservation project in the door, and that's as far as you go. Then you may hire a consultant and bring a consultant in to influence the change. Then there's somebody inside the organization who's a champion of the change. You grow, and then you go into an insider, and then you get fully integrated. And Rebecca Brown, as I say, it's written up. It's a beautifully short